So, Chris, first LA, D.C., now potentially Baltimore, Chicago. From a law enforcement perspective, in terms of planning and effectiveness, what do you see in what the president is talking about doing?
Well, I think as Governor Moore articulated, this is a manufactured crisis, which he's done repeatedly to justify the deployment of troops in L.A., U.S. Marines in L.A., completely inappropriate. And I would say, arguably, one of the most anti or un-American things that you could do. You know, as we approach our 250th anniversary, you know, remember what we rebelled against. It was tyrannical rule, oppressive policies, and the stationing of troops in U.S. cities. Troops are not there for policing. It's why Posse Comitatus was drafted after the Civil War, you know, getting us through Reconstruction, and there are a few exceptions for it. None of the things he is mentioning are exceptions. The use of National Guard, they're not police. There's not an emergency. There's not a national emergency. There's not an insurrection. All the things that you're allowed to use National Guard troops to support policing, none of those things exist right now. So they'll be ineffective. They're not trained. They don't have the authority to do it. And if he truly wanted to drive crime down, like he could have done in D.C., you could surge the FBI and other federal agencies to supplement the actions that are going on there, but in limited scale, going after violent gangs, going after, you know, fugitives. There's some things that you could do. But this broadsword is not the approach that you want.
Yamiche, the president has essentially declared victory in D.C. That's what we just heard from him as he continues to speak in the Oval Office. So what might that mean for what's next?
Well, the president is declaring a sort of victory in Washington, D.C., but he's also tightening his grip around the city. Just today, the president signed an executive order trying to force Washington, D.C. to end its cashless bail system that's been there since 1992. And a second executive order is targeting nationwide cities and states. That being said, the president has also said that he wants to send the National Guard to other cities and states. He specifically name-checked Maryland and California, though he also said maybe he wants to be invited. Take a listen.
We want to go from here to other places, but I was telling some of the people that in a certain way, you really want to be asked to go. You know, I hate to barge in on a city and then be treated horribly by corrupt politicians.
Now, the president said in part that he wants to be invited because he doesn't want politicians to take credit for any sort of drop in crime that might come from a federalization or federal actions in a city or state. But the president also said, and this is really important, that he's not going to wait to be invited. So he's also essentially hinting at the idea that he might send the National Guard into Illinois or California or Maryland against the wishes of those governors. Chris?
Thank you for that, Yamiche. Governor, look, you understand very clearly what it means when the National Guard comes into your state, what it means when it comes in to a community. Donald Trump essentially said today that, you know what, not only was he not happy that he wasn't being thanked for this, he suggested that there are people who want a dictator. He says, I'm not a dictator. I'm being accused of being a dictator. But some people may want someone to come in and take control. So I wonder how you see this and what the options are for governors in this case.
Well, I mean, I have to tell you, I have such a different take than what we've just heard. They talk about a manufactured crisis. Have you been in Chicago? Have you been in Baltimore? Look, my daughter went to school in Chicago. I remember the day she graduated, there were shootings and killings right outside of her building. And in Baltimore, I have friends that go down to Johns Hopkins, get treated for medical conditions. I mean, they are nervous about ever going there. There are parts of Baltimore that he tells me he wouldn't go into. And this is not some right-wing person. This is somebody who wants to be able to go into some of our great cities and be able to be safe. Now, I do think it's important that if you're going to do this, you've got to define the mission. You've got to talk about your authority. And I think one of the earlier guest was saying that, you know, well, maybe there's narrow ways to do it. I agree with that, but that just then says that there are ways to do it. And if I had had a crisis in Cleveland, we thought we were going to have riots, or in Columbus or whatever, I would never have put, you know, the fact that, well, I'm governor, so I would want to work with other people who wanted to help me. And look, what's been happening in Chicago has been terrible. The crime rate is high. The gang problem is real. I tried to get Arne Duncan, the former education secretary under Obama, to run for mayor. He's out there trying to work to get, to deal with the gang problem. He didn't want to do it. But I think Chicago is a jewel of America. And we just cannot let lawlessness and fear dominate these cities. So, yeah, I think we need to know what the mission is. I think we need to know what the authority is. I think we need to know what the length is. But the idea that these cities are somehow fine, I think you're
I don't think
you're
anybody.
whistling.
Listen.
I heard the
take
word
your point.
manufacturing crisis. This is a manufactured crisis. No, it's not. It is a crisis. There are
Go
people
ahead, Basil.
at
You're
risk
dying
in
to
these
jump in
cities.
here.
So I absolutely disagree, because if this were a crisis, rents wouldn't be $4,000 a month for a studio, right? We have an affordability crisis in some of these cities because people want to move there. People want to live there. So you can't have this manufactured crisis and think that it's a real crisis if you have the, if there is a demand for $4,000 a month studio apartments. So having said that, the one point, and I agree with everything you said, and one of the things that you said at the end is where I want to pick up on.
You mean Chris or the
Chris,
governor?
I'm sorry, Chris.
Yeah.
This said that you said at the end that I want to pick up on. Because what does get left out in this conversation is that the people that live in those communities, these communities where all this alleged crime is taking place, those residents are not passive in wanting to try to make their communities better. So what they do is they do partner with law enforcement. They go to the local police precincts. They are in those community organization meetings with federal and local law enforcement to try to find solutions to these problems. If you want the federal government to be involved, there are tons of nonprofits that get support to be violence interrupters, to go into violent situations to try to bring some peace to their neighborhoods. None of that is really getting discussed here. What the president is saying is he wants to have law enforcement with long guns in these neighborhoods to put fear in the minds of those residents in communities that are largely led by Black mayors. Where is the partnership? That's not being discussed. Where is the elevation of those community voices and those leaders that want something done? That's not being discussed. And so don't tell me that that somehow there is this rampant crime and criminality where people don't want to be in these cities when there's an affordability crisis in those same areas.
Well, I think it is fair to say, objective to say, that the crime statistics show that crime is down. Having said that, there's no one who lives in probably almost any city in America who doesn't wish that things were better, right? So to the point of all of that, Barbara, there's a political conversation that is not happening between the president and governors and mayors. The mayor of Chicago, Barbara, put out a statement yesterday saying, this is just in part, quote, "We are currently evaluating all of our legal options to protect the people of Chicago from unconstitutional federal overreach." Do they have legal options, Barb?
Yes. So, what we saw in Los Angeles was the president relying on a very particular authority when there was unrest in relation to protests about immigration. He was able to use an authority there. In Washington, D.C., we have a very unique municipality that is the seat of the federal government that gives the president some authorities to control policing there for a limited period of time. When it comes to other cities generically across the country, the president must rely on a specific authority. If he's going to declare an emergency, he has to state the basis of it. He has to find a statute to hang his hat on. And so until we know what that is, it's difficult to know what authority he might have whatsoever to go into these cities. But if he does, I imagine that cities may challenge that assertion of authority. In Los Angeles, the authority required that there be some sort of insurrection or rebellion. Ordinary high crime statistics are not the same as an insurrection or a rebellion. Under the Posse Comitatus Act, the National Guard and other law enforcement agencies are prohibited from simply enforcing the law, criminal laws against the people. That goes right back to the origins of our country, where we worried about overreach by a federal government that was acting like a monarchy. And so I'm sure cities like Chicago and Baltimore, if they do find the president bringing in federal troops or federal law enforcement to take on this sort of overriding role, we will see legal challenges to that.
So I'm wondering, Chris, one thing the governor of Illinois said over the weekend was this: Trump's goal is to incite fear in our communities and destabilize existing public safety efforts to create a justification to further abuse power. We've pointed this out in some places. Baltimore, Chicago, violent crime rates have been going down. They are down. Again, are they where everyone would want them to be? You'd want them to be at zero. Having said that, could these deployments actually hurt what these efforts have been and the way that they have been moving in the right direction?
Yeah, by the way, I agree with the governor. I have a daughter who lives in Washington, D.C., and there is crime there, but this is not the way you solve it. When I drove into Washington, on Friday and Saturday, there were not tires burning. There weren't roving mobs, of people with weapons. So the deployment of the military is not the approach. And look back at L.A. They deployed U.S. Marines. I'm a former U.S. Marine. It's an infantry battalion. The basic maneuver component is an infantry rifle squad. The mission is to locate, close with, and destroy the enemy by fire and maneuver, or to repel the enemy's assault by fire in close combat. That is the stated mission. That is not what we should be sending to U.S. cities. The second order effect of normalizing that is you're going to start getting people pushing back. So you will create that very violence that you're trying to drive down. I've been deployed all over the world. You want to see how an insurgency starts? You put unnecessary militarization and oppressive policies in a place. And again, going back to our origin story, the reason the Boston Tea Party happened, which was an act of political violence, was in rebellion against such deployments of troops.